I sat in the chair hoping that the Lord would give somebody a vision of me holding a baby. Anything that had to do with a baby, I was just really hoping to get that confirmation. And instead, I was met with people having visions of me having to let go of things. People saying stuff along those lines of just let it go, surrender. And I basically had a mental breakdown in front of the whole staff. Pastor Alina pulled me aside and said, it's okay to tell God that you're angry. And it was almost like she was giving me permission, or the Lord was using her to give me the permission to tell him I was mad. My name is Shannon Probasco, and in January of 2019, my husband George and I decided that we wanted to start our family. As soon as we started trying, we conceived our first. Shortly after I found out I was pregnant, I miscarried. Going through that, it was very tough because I was obviously very new to this whole experience. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was happening. I learned that I had what we call a chemical pregnancy. So a chemical pregnancy is something that happens up to 5 weeks of pregnancy. And really what is happening is the embryo is implanting, but it stops growing. It was very nerve-wracking because I found out around 12 p.m. and by 7 p.m. I was bleeding. George came home from work. I told him what happened. We cried, we were angry, we were sad, we were all of those emotions that come with that. Shortly after we processed everything that had happened and we went to the Lord and we went to our friends and our family and we processed everything, we decided to keep going and to keep trying. And then that brings us to our pregnancy of March of 2020. That pregnancy lasted a bit longer than my first, but still ended in a miscarriage. Again, that was what they consider a chemical pregnancy. This was an interesting time compared to the first because around this time we had just started the pandemic. So not only was it a time of nerves in general because we weren't sure what was going on around us, it added us more nerves and more fear and anxiety of now this has happened to me a second time. George was at the time, he was a firefighter and he was doing night shifts. I had been talking to him about my fears. So he was always encouraging me to just, trust God, trust the process. But something inside of me really felt like this pregnancy was not going to last. He encouraged me to call Lindsay White. So at some point in that pregnancy, I had reached out to her. She helped me process those feelings and pointed me to scripture and prayed with me. And the night that I felt like I was going to miscarry again, because at this point, I know my body very well. I know the triggers for a miscarriage. I believe the Holy Spirit also prepares us for things. And I knew that something was going to happen. And George at the time was at the firehouse working a night shift. So I was home alone. I couldn't go anywhere. So I called Lindsay again. She told me to pray Romans 15:13 over my womb. May the God of hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust in him. And that night I miscarried. Again, I was alone because George was at the firehouse. But the beauty of that is, I believe, looking back, that the Lord was really trying to teach me that I needed to lean on him more. And I needed to have my own faith, not George's faith, not Lindsay's faith. But I needed to have that Romans 15:13, that the Lord will give you joy as you wait on him. And that's what happened. It was sad. We were angry again. George came home that morning and I told him what happened. We processed that together again. But, it was different because I felt like the Lord was really teaching me things at the same time. I had grown a lot from the first miscarriage. I had learned a lot from the first miscarriage. And he brought people into my life in that time to really teach me to lean into him more. And Romans 15, it's actually on this necklace, has been my lifeline since then. And I use it to pray over other people for things that they go through, but really just finding that joy and that peace. So after that miscarriage, the same question came back of, should we keep trying? Should we stop? Should we seek medical help? What should we do? Again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Doctors aren't taking new patients. It's a weird time. So we just kept trying on our own. I have what's called PCOS, so my body does not ovulate as it's supposed to all the time. Doesn't really know what to do. Some cycles I skip. Some are right on time. You just really, with that, you never know what you're going to get. So really sorting through that too, which involves a lot of taking tests every day of your menstrual cycle to see if you're ovulating, and catching that right time to be able to conceive. And it became very overwhelming. Again, it became like something that we were in a marriage just to have a baby, and that's not always what you want. Obviously, you want to enjoy your marriage. You want to enjoy each other. So we decided that in July of 2021, we would go to the specialist. So we started going to see a specialist, and with that came lots of blood work for both George and I, lots of doctor's appointments, lots of early 6 a.m., 7 a.m. doctor's appointments, but just to see if we were healthy. We came to find out that my PCOS was clearly the issue here, and also I have low progesterone. So after I ovulate, my progesterone is not high enough to keep a baby alive. Hearing that obviously can be overwhelming, but for me, it was a sense of peace. It reminded me that I wasn't a failure, that it was nothing that I was doing wrong. Although it felt like that at times, I couldn't keep putting that on myself. I was also kind of relieved that it was an issue within my body and not George's, because I just felt like I could carry that a little bit better, of understanding that there's hope in that with medical science of making my body be able to do what it's supposed to do, medicine to keep a baby alive after you conceive. So while going through that process and with that diagnosis, we also found some things, some polyps in my uterus that had to be removed. So that brings us to October of 2021, where I had a surgery to remove the polyps. This was different for me. I do experience anxiety. It definitely heightens when it comes to my health. I don't think I really fully understood that until I was preparing for the surgery. We were in Ocean City with the staff, enjoying time together. It's supposed to be a time of fun, relaxation, preparing for what's to come for Kingsway and the vision and all of that. And instead of me being involved in all of that, I was dealing with crippling anxiety. I wasn't eating. I just wanted to sleep. Now, I'm an extroverted person, so I love to be around people. So that was also hard for me. I have fear of missing out. So I wanted to constantly be around others, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I came out for our meeting sessions, and the whole time I was doing the breathing technique, 4 in, 4 out, reminding myself that I was grounded, wasn't paying attention to really anything that was being said around me. I was just trying to make it through so I could go back to bed and be by myself. That was really hard for me, and I think during that time I didn't know why I was feeling the way that I was feeling. I didn't associate that the anxiety was linked to the surgery that was coming up. And it wasn't until after I had the surgery and the anxiety completely went away that I realized what that was. And thankfully, everything came back fine for that. They had to check to make sure it wasn't cancerous. So good news out of that also helped us to move on and take our next step. After the surgery, we started our rounds of medicated menstrual cycles. With that comes medicine called letrozole to help you ovulate. And then I also had to give myself a trigger shot to make sure that I would actually ovulate with the medicine. After that, they would check me to make sure everything was well. So again, I was in the doctor's office many times during the week, morning appointments, blood draws. I got to the point where my one vein was extremely enlarged, and I was not used to that. So it was an experience, to say the least. It was a journey. We did 3 medicated cycles that did not take. After the 3rd, they decided to transfer me to an IUI, and we would just really go with the flow there to see what would happen if the extra help of taking the sperm to the egg would help. And we had a failed IUI. And it was after the IUI that George and I realized that we were not doing that again. Now, I want to say that some people, their journey is medicated cycles, and that helps them conceive. Some people, their journey is IUI, and that helps them conceive. Some people's journey is IVF, and that helps them conceive. And I believe that's a part of the story that God has for their lives. But for George and I, we didn't feel that way. We felt like we took God out of the equation for us. So we decided to try it on our own again. Now, remember, I have PCOS, so it's really hard for me to know if I'm going to ovulate at all. So it was really just trying to put our faith in God. So we went through the process again of just hoping, praying, and believing that my body would do what it needed to do and that we would conceive naturally. Come October 2022, we obviously still had not conceived. I was struggling a lot. I had made having a baby an idol. I had made wanting to be a mom an idol. I forgot what my purpose was in life other than being a mom. So I was struggling. I was angry, but I didn't want to admit that I was angry. I grew up in the church. I knew that God was faithful. I knew that he had plans, but I did not want to admit that I was mad at him because I felt like that was wrong. So again, we're with the staff, and we did a time of prayer where you would sit in a chair and people would pray over you, and they would just speak things, anything that they see, anything that the Lord is telling them about your life. I sat in the chair hoping that the Lord would give somebody a vision of me holding a baby. Anything that had to do with a baby, I was just really hoping to get that confirmation. And instead, I was met with people having visions of me having to let go of things. People saying stuff along those lines of just let it go, surrender was a big thing that kept coming up in that. And I basically had a mental breakdown in front of the whole staff, which is traumatizing for me and literally my worst nightmare. But they're so gracious because they get it. People have their moments, and it's okay to cry and be mad and upset. And it's even more okay to do it around people you trust and you love. After my mental breakdown, Pastor Alina pulled me aside and said, it's okay to tell God that you're angry. And it was almost like she was giving me permission, or the Lord was using her to give me the permission to tell him I was mad. So that's what I did. Went back to our room, and I sorted through the feelings that I was feeling because I had obviously just been through a lot. It takes me a little bit to process my feelings at times. I don't always know exactly how I'm feeling. After processing and talking and yelling and being frustrated with the Lord, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders with just starting off with telling him that I was mad and feeling okay with being able to say that. And I believe that's when the freedom and the breakthrough started. I believe that's when he started to really work on my heart on what it really means to surrender something to him. And as the months went on, each month, just trying to make sure that my body is doing what it needed to do to successfully conceive a child and carry it. I was still frustrated, but I was a little bit stronger, a little bit more faith in the Lord. Around the time of the fast, maybe December, right before the fast, a girl that I don't really talk to, she was in my life group. We're acquaintances. She's very sweet, but we don't always cross paths. She wrote me a note and she gave me a necklace. She told me she felt like the Lord was telling her to do this. She didn't understand why, but she obeyed him. So this is my encouragement. If the Lord is ever telling you to encourage someone, do it. But she gave me this letter and this necklace. And in the letter, it talked about how she needed to surrender having a baby to the Lord, and how the breakthrough did not fully happen until she fully surrendered. She talked about how it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be mad, but it's also okay to fully let go and trust that God has a plan and a will for your life and this baby that you will eventually have. She talked about being a warrior, and what that looks like to be a warrior, to surrender all of that to the Lord. So in a Wawa parking lot, I cried again. And I felt like God was telling me to just surrender, to let it go. I needed to stop being on the fence about it. And I just needed to fully let go. And I remember sitting there thinking, you know what, Lord? When I worship you, I'm like this. When I really need to be like this, because I'm still holding on. I'm not fully letting go. And that vision alone helped me move on. I believe he gave that to me to help me understand that that was the next step that I needed to take. I fully surrendered it. I prayed. I asked God to take the desires away, to replace those desires with him and getting to know him better and getting to know my husband better and to experience our marriage differently. And I believe that's when the real change started to happen. So around Christmas time, George and I decided to do an Advent book together, which was on waiting and surrender. That book was exactly what him and I needed to not only do alone, but to do together. Kind of opened us up to have those conversations of what it means to wait on the Lord for something, what it means to surrender to something. And it was with that book and with that time with George that my faith grew and I was able to continue to surrender. And then when the fast came, usually what I would do for the fast was fast for a baby. This time I did not. This time I fasted to have a better relationship with Jesus and for him to continue to help me surrender that desire to him and to lay it at his feet every day. And that's what he did. With his grace, I was able to do that. I remember sitting in the chair one day and the Lord asking me, would it be okay if it was just you and George forever? And now he has asked me that question in the past. And each time I have said no very quickly. This time I said yes. And I confidently can say that I fully believed that I was truly okay with it only being George and I forever. Now, did that come with some sadness? A little bit, but the faith was there, and that surrender was there. And I remember saying that to George and him being like, well, I don't know if I'm okay with that. And, just talking through that with him too, because communication with your husband, with your spouse is key. And also letting the other one know that you may not be always on the same page, but it's okay to process that together. We were able to talk that through of what that meant. And, that's something that him and the Lord had to work out together as well. George's birthday is on January 21st. I asked George earlier that month what he wanted for his birthday, and he said a baby. And I was able to laugh and say, well, I don't know if that's something that God has planned right now, but we can try, which just one shows how different of a place I was in, because in the past I would have just started crying and felt guilt. But being able to laugh with him and just say, no, we're going to trust God with that, and maybe it'll happen. January 23rd, I found out that I was pregnant. So I was able to wrap up that pregnancy gift and give that to him as his birthday gift, which in itself is super special, to give somebody exactly what they wanted for their birthday, but also to know that you guys have made it on the other side, that the Lord was working behind the scenes for the past 4 years of everything that we had been through. Now, don't get me wrong, finding out you're pregnant after a miscarriage is pretty traumatic. PTSD is a real thing. With every cramp, every twinge, I would get nervous again. And again, George's faith came in, and he would encourage me that it would be okay. But because I had seen a specialist, I was able to go to the doctors early on in my pregnancy and get blood drawn. We got to see the baby at 5 weeks, which is not normal. But because I was higher risk with miscarriage, I was able to do that. And I believe that is one of the reasons that the Lord sent us to the specialist, was because he knew what was coming and he knew what I would need when that time came. With every, waiting moment of trying to get results back, there was fear, a lot of it. But then with the fear came frustration, because I had already surrendered this over to the Lord. So I felt like I was backtracking, and it was frustrating for me to feel that way, but I also had to deal with the fact that that was how I was feeling. So I started to pray, Lord, help my unbelief, because I wanted to believe that this pregnancy was it, but I also had unbelief. So I just needed him to help my unbelief. And he came through every single time. One time, he even had Pastor Brooke send me a message, and it was scripture in Psalms talking about how he opened the woman's womb and made her mom. And she didn't know I was pregnant, but she just happened to say that she read it and she thought of me and she was praying for me. But I knew that that was the Lord using somebody else for another confirmation that I needed to stay grounded in him, and that he was in control, and that this pregnancy would be okay. Like I said in the beginning, I have low progesterone. They did have to put me on some medicine to help keep this baby alive. Coming off that medicine, again, brought fear because I started to then have put my faith in the medicine. The reason this baby was alive was only because of that medicine. But at 10 weeks, they take you off of that. And I had to take that to the Lord again. I had to apologize. I had to ask for forgiveness. And I had to fully trust him that he was in control. And the reason why this baby was alive wasn't because of the medicine, although he does use medicine, but it was because he had written this story, and he had decided that this baby would stay alive. So we are now 25 weeks into our pregnancy. Everything has been perfect. I have not had any complications. Even in the beginning with the morning sickness, it wasn't bad. This pregnancy has honestly been perfect, and that's something that George had prayed from the very beginning of finding out that this would just be an easy pregnancy, and that's what it has been. And the Lord has really proven himself to us in that way. And I'll wrap it up by saying the whole redemptive part of this story is I found out that I was pregnant with my first miscarriage on January 23rd, 2019. And I found out that I was pregnant with this pregnancy on January 23rd, 2023. So if that's not clear enough, I don't know what is. But the Lord clearly has a sense of humor, and he also likes to show off at times. And I believe that's what he did with this pregnancy, just so it's not only my testimony, it's not only George's testimony, but it's also her testimony. And one day she's going to be able to tell the world how the Lord brought her into this world.
What would you like to tell the person on the other side of the screen watching this that perhaps is going through the same thing that you went through?
It's not your fault. It's nothing that you did wrong. God isn't punishing you for anything. Sometimes God just uses situations so he can tell your story so you can have a story to tell. And also, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel the feelings, but it's also good to talk about those feelings with others. It's also good to talk about those feelings with the Lord, to be honest, open, and vulnerable. And I would also say to not go through it alone. I think for so long, the world has really put miscarriage and infertility in a little box, and they wouldn't talk about it. It was almost like it was shame. But I believe the more that people talk about it, the more that women understand that they're not alone. And I would just encourage somebody to tell their story, to open up with others, because it's important.